Every night, the mother quietly watched her husband walk into her daughter's room without knocking. At first, she thought he was simply being attentive, until the day she discovered a small hidden camera tucked inside her daughter's teddy bear. And it was her daughter's diary that made her knees buckle. Rachel tilted her head slightly to the right, not because she heard anything unusual, but simply to make sense of the odd feeling that had crept in at the start of that Sunday. She was folding clothes to put away in the closet, her eyes lingering on the old family photo frame which had gathered a thin layer of dust. It sat silently as if someone had pressed pause on time. It was a time from the past now, almost untouchable, even with bare hands. Emily hadn't asked anything or spoken a word for an entire week. She greeted Tom when she sat down at the table, ate her rice slowly, as though keeping a promise she had made to herself. Rachel noticed, but said nothing. She had asked just one question: "How do you feel about all this?" Emily only shrugged, then walked back to her room before the sound of a reply could fully form. Some silences are longer than any spoken word, and Rachel understood that in that moment no answer could have been the right one. Tom lived on the first floor, 2 doors and a short hallway away from Emily's room. He brought into their home paintings of meadows and forests and arranged things in a way that was stark precise, untouched by dust. Rachel had often noticed that his sense of order felt measured, as if everything needed to be balanced by ratios. But that was part of why she had believed Tom could be the foundation of their household. A man who lived by rules, she thought, must also be someone who kept his word. On the concrete ledge of the back porch, Emily often sat and drew in silence. She usually chose a spot beside the slanting sunlight, where a wooden parasol on the armrest seemed to shield her from the world. Tom would occasionally come by holding a cup of tea or a small plate of pastries. Whenever she lowered her head, he leaned in to glance at her sketchbook. One day he remarked, "She drew a tree that looks like something from an Andrew Wyeth painting. She has talent." But no one had asked him, and Emily didn't respond. "I just wanted to see what she was drawing," Tom tried to explain. Rachel bit her tongue and chose silence. Tom always entered the kitchen at the same time, making coffee in his own way using brown sugar and cinnamon. Even the way he held a teacup or pulled out a chair carried a strange calculation. Emily noticed it earlier than her mother did. Once she stood at the top of the stairs watching Tom adjust a crooked photo frame that no one had asked him to fix. Her eyes stayed there for a long while. Not on his hands, but on how he restored everything with exact precision down to the last millimeter. One day, while changing Emily's bed sheets, Rachel mistakenly grabbed the pillow used for essential oils. From beneath it, a stiff piece of paper slid out. She meant to fold it back, but her eyes caught the image. On the paper was a faceless, tall figure standing behind a window. In the drawing, Emily sat curled up on the floor, hugging her knees. The overall palette was gray and smoky blue. The scene didn't seem grounded in reality, but rather resembled a heightened sense of alert, like someone had set a trap and was waiting in the dark. There were no words in the drawing, but beside the window, a faintly outlined box seemed left for something else, as if someone had meant to continue drawing, but stopped midway. Rachel returned the drawing to its place under the pillow before turning off the lamp. She knew not everything should be questioned right away. Sometimes adults shouldn't seek answers in dialogue, but begin by sitting with the young person and simply looking at a picture together. That night at dinner, Tom spoke about rewriting the manuscript of a philosophy book he had never published. "I want to re-examine the relationship between discipline and freedom in the modern family," he said, smiling faintly. Rachel responded with a polite smile. Emily stared at her glass of orange juice the entire meal and never touched her fork or spoon. After dinner, Tom washed the dishes. Emily went upstairs, and Rachel stood on the back porch, listening to the clinking of plates, soft but rhythmically dull, like a tedious melody. Sometimes a person's sense of order is merely a curtain they draw over what they wish to control. She recalled the first times Tom appeared at the library, polite and articulate in every sentence, every glance. Everyone liked him, but sometimes the first impression is just the most carefully prepared version of a person. The next morning, after Emily left for school, Rachel entered her daughter's room to check the trash bin, an old habit from when Emily was in elementary school, used whenever silence lasted too long. Amid torn papers, she found a piece of a drawing, a figure sitting at a desk with someone else's shadow looming behind. The lines were messy colors, broken up, but there was a strange symbol in the corner, a small circle marked 1E06. Rachel didn't ask Emily about it. Instead, she went to school early that day and sat in the library for almost an hour watching students come and go. Maybe she was searching for something in their eyes, the kind of look adults often miss because they're too busy talking about themselves. That evening, when she returned home, she noticed Tom had rearranged the bookshelf in the living room. His and her books were now separated into two labeled sections: applied knowledge and emotional knowledge. Rachel picked up one book, then put it back. She had never thought her books needed categorizing. Passing through the back porch, she saw Emily's sketchbook left on the wooden chair. She picked it up, intending only to close it, but the last page lay open, showing a faint pencil note. "Some things just can't be put away in the drawer, Mom." Rachel didn't know what Emily was referring to, but she knew every door has two sides. One opens so someone can walk in, and the other closes to keep something safe inside. A home is not a place where everyone has to be cheerful all the time, but one where everyone feels safe, even in sadness. She turned off the lights and stood in the living room's darkness for a while. Everything appeared to be in the right place, but sometimes something wrong begins exactly when everything seems too right. The headache was no longer just a physical sensation. It lingered like a faint, persistent presence, threading its way into the silences between meals in her daughter's eyes, and especially in those long, reasonless nights. When Rachel walked down to the kitchen for some water, what made her stop wasn't the pain, but a faint light spilling down from the second floor. The desk lamp in Emily's room was still on. She set the glass on the counter without drinking. Her right hand gripped the stair railing as she quietly stepped up, trying not to make a sound, though even she wasn't sure what she was being so cautious about. As she neared the top, the light made things clearer. Emily's door wasn't fully closed, just open enough for someone to slip through. In the doorway, the silhouette of a man stood with his back to her head, slightly bowed shoulders hunched forward. Rachel stopped. Her heart slowed as if checking its own rhythm. "Tom! What's going on?" Her voice wasn't loud, but enough for him to turn. Tom didn't flinch. He turned away from the room, stepping out into the hall. The light caught his eyes in a quiet, unreadable gleam. He answered in a neutral tone. "I saw her light was still on. Thought maybe she forgot to turn it off." Rachel didn't step inside. She just stood at the doorway looking at her daughter, who was curled up facing the wall. The blanket had been pulled up to her shoulders, but one of Emily's hands still clutched the edge, as if holding on to something. From where she stood, Rachel could see her daughter's shoulder trembling ever so slightly. Emily's eyes were red with traces of tears at the corners that hadn't yet dried. She didn't sob. She cried in silence, as if afraid even her own voice had no place there. Her eyes were half closed, but her expression was tense, not from peaceful sleep, but from holding herself together. Tom glanced briefly at Rachel, then added, "I was about to go down for some water. Saw the light on, figured I'd turn it off for her." "Okay," Rachel replied softly, eyes still locked on her daughter. "I'll remind her tomorrow." Tom nodded and walked past her. His steps weren't hurried, but they didn't stop. He said nothing more, leaving behind a room still steeped in a panic that hadn't yet found the strength to speak. She closed the door this time, locking it carefully, but when her hand touched the doorknob, a chill crept into her palm. It wasn't the weather. It was something that had yet to be named. She later told the story to Maggie, her longtime co-worker, who was used to grading papers with her every weekend afternoon as they went over the sixth graders' essays on the place where I feel safest. Rachel read through each one without really absorbing the words. "Maggie, if you saw your husband standing in your daughter's room at midnight just to turn off the light, would that feel normal to you, Maggie?" Paused her pen and looked up. "How long was he standing there? I'm not sure. When I got there, he turned around immediately. Said he saw the light on." Maggie didn't respond right away. She flipped a page, then said slowly, "Sometimes things look innocent, but your gut tells you something's off." "What do you feel?" Rachel said. "Nothing." She wasn't sure. "How's Emily been lately?" Maggie continued. "Quiet, too polite. She doesn't make noise, doesn't complain. Every time I ask about school, she answers like she's being tested. Last week, Emily asked to change seats, said she wanted more quiet. I didn't ask why. Thought maybe she needed to focus on her drawing." Rachel nodded, heart heavy. She remembered Emily's drawings from before, full of colors, flowers, open fields. Lately, they were all in black and white. One showed a single bed under a spotlight, walls closing in on every side. That evening, when Emily went to her room early saying she wanted to read, Rachel stayed in the kitchen staring out into the backyard. The warm yellow light glowed through the small window. Tom's folding chair had been neatly set aside. Everything seemed fine, only she wasn't. She stood up and went to Emily's room, stopped at the door, didn't knock, didn't go in. Through the small gap, the light from the desk lamp spilled out as usual, but this time there was no one else inside. Just the soft scratch of pencil on paper, the breeze through the window bars, and a feeling inside her turning into something beyond words. The next morning, while folding Emily's jacket for the laundry, Rachel found some crumpled slips of paper in the pocket. Not homework, not reminders. She didn't usually read her daughter's private notes, but this time her fingers stopped on a line not yet crossed out. No one sees anything, but I still feel like someone's watching. She placed the paper back, closed the door, and walked downstairs with the feeling that she had just crossed a line as a mother. Yet it was the most necessary thing she could do in that moment. On Tuesday afternoon, Rachel picked Emily up from school. The girl quietly hugged her sketchbook. On the way home, Rachel stopped at a small grocery store and asked gently, "Do you want to come in with me?" Emily shook her head. "Can I wait over at the bench across the street?" Rachel nodded, asking no more. She walked in, keeping an eye through the window. Emily sat alone on the long bench, eyes down. At one point, she opened her sketchbook, stared at a page for a long time, then closed it again. When Rachel came back out, Emily was already standing. Sketchbook still in hand, but beside the trash bin was a folded piece of paper she had dropped. Emily didn't turn to pick it up. She got into the car as if nothing had happened. Rachel waited until they hit a red light before unfolding the paper. It was a pencil drawing. The image was clear, but faceless. A man leaned over a desk. His shadow stretched long across the floor toward a bed where a little girl sat curled up, head buried in her knees. The desk lamp cast the only light on the girl. No words, no captions, but the weight in Rachel's chest settled with the certainty of someone whispering in her ear. "You see it now, don't you? In life, what we need most is not always someone to confirm what is right or wrong, but the clarity to recognize when something is wrong, even when it comes dressed as normal. Children don't lie well, but they are very good at silence, and silence is the final form of self-defense." Rachel gripped the steering wheel gently. She didn't say a word to Emily the whole way home, but inside she had already made a choice from tomorrow on nothing. She once brushed off as coincidence would be allowed to pass without being understood completely. Dinner passed in a nameless silence. On the table, each plate of food remained nearly untouched, as if everyone was simply there to complete a familiar ritual rather than truly be with one another. Tom lifted his glass of water to his lips, glancing casually toward Emily. "Did your desk partner stay home today?" Emily blinked, then answered softly. She moved to the row on the left. Tom continued, his tone as light as the breeze. "Are you okay with that?" She didn't answer right away. After a moment, she replied, still staring down, "It's fine." Rachel picked up a slice of carrot and placed it on the edge of her plate, but didn't eat. Her eyes paused on her daughter's small hands, fingers playing with the soup spoon without lifting it. Tonight's dinner was no different from the last, except no one mentioned it. "Mom, may I go to my room early? I have a history quiz tomorrow." Rachel nodded. Emily stood up gently, retrieved her jacket draped over the chair, and walked straight upstairs. Tom watched her go, then turned to his wife. "This age is strange, unpredictable. Sometimes it's better not to ask too much." Rachel didn't respond. She turned her face toward the window, where a thin tree branch swayed gently in the wind, casting a shadow on the wall like a memory with no clear shape. Emily came home looking exhausted, rain speckles on her sleeves, eyes burning from sneezing repeatedly. As she quietly climbed the stairs, Rachel knew her daughter wouldn't say anything more than the usual line, "It's nothing. Mom, just a little headache." She let it be waited until Emily entered her room, then followed, quietly opening the closet to retrieve some cold medicine. Her hand brushed against an old gray teddy bear, the one Emily always kept on the shelf by the window. It was a toy brought from their former home, carried through several moves without ever being left behind. But today, it felt different. Rachel held the bear, noticing its weight wasn't quite the same as before. Part of her stilled mid-breath. Her fingers gently pressed into the bear's body and felt something solid inside, not soft stuffing, not the familiar rattle of cheap plastic beads. Her eyes stopped at the bear's belly, spotting a neat stitch line that didn't match the sewing she used to do when her daughter was little. Opening that fabric revealed a small device, a tiny black lens at the center clearly belonging to no child's world. Rachel didn't scream, didn't drop the bear. She just sat there quiet, as if waiting for herself to fully understand what she'd found. She put it back exactly where it was, changing nothing. No one needed to know. Not yet. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The pale light from her phone screen flickered across her tired face as she scrolled through old photos like someone searching for a crack in a mirror they didn't want to see. In one picture from Emily's birthday a few months ago, a wooden wall clock appeared faintly in the background, brown trim vintage style with a slightly misaligned hour hand. But now hanging in that very spot was a stark white digital clock with glowing blue numbers. She remembered never deciding to replace the old one. Tom had installed the new clock quietly, offering only a simple explanation. The old one was keeping the wrong time. A small detail, yet like a grain of sand caught in the throat. It didn't choke, but it wouldn't go down either. Something in her heart cracked, though not enough to break completely. Another day, Emily came home late. She said she'd been at a study group for math preparing for a test. Rachel nodded and didn't ask further. But once her daughters went to her room, Rachel called the school office. The answer came gently: no study group had been registered. Rachel hung up. She sat still in the kitchen, staring at a cold cup of tea she hadn't brought to her lips. A silent tide rose in her chest, not clear in shape, but unmistakable in sound. Emily returned, went straight to her room, and skipped dinner. When Rachel asked, her daughter replied only, "I already ate, not hungry." She didn't insist, didn't try to push the door. But from the hallway, she heard the sound of a lock turning, a cold click in a house that used to be warm. Later that night, while sorting through Emily's things to find her gym shirt, Rachel's eyes stopped at the new lock installed on the door. It wasn't the simple twist style she had bought before. This one was electronic with a card or remote to open. A quick search on her phone showed that the model could record entry logs. She didn't know whom to ask or where to begin. Loose puzzle pieces spun in her head: the replaced clock, the teddy bear with a hidden camera, the upgraded lock, all floating without forming a clear picture. Some wounds don't need names. They simply exist quietly, reminding adults that something once went wrong. They show up in averted eyes, in a quick nod instead of a greeting. They sit in a lock no one taught the child to use, yet she knew exactly how to guard the last quiet corner of herself. Rachel sat down, her back resting against the headboard, eyes falling into the spreading darkness in the room's corners. Her hand reached for the phone still charging beside the night lamp. She opened the voice recording app and named the new file, "Third night, listen only, no talking." Then she placed the phone face down on the table, pulled the blanket up to her chest, and slowly let her body sink like floating in still water. Not to sleep, but to see if the darkness would speak. Not to sleep, but to listen. Rachel didn't ask her daughter why she had declined the art club. She didn't push about her sleep, the fleeting glances during dinner, or the times Emily flinched when someone called her from behind. Instead, she chose quiet observation, listening to every small sound, every slight habit of her daughter. Sometimes, silence is the loudest language of a child who doesn't want to be heard again. Emily had started writing in a small notebook, not with regular sentences, but with a strange system of symbols, circles, arrows, and slashes. Rachel only discovered it by accident while washing her daughter's coat. The notebook had been sewn into the lining of the inner pocket. It was hidden so carefully that it made Rachel's heart ache. Children don't usually hide things that well unless they no longer believe adults will protect them. She sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the dim yellow glow of the lamp and the ticking of the wall clock. In the darkness, her doubts grew, not like crashing waves, but like something persistent, dull, and relentless. Once, while cleaning the family laptop used for appointments and schoolwork, Rachel stumbled upon a folder labeled Isadora Notes. Curious about the unfamiliar name, she opened it. Inside were dozens of text files, each dated and meticulously recorded, frighteningly detailed. Emily woke up at 6:43, did not turn on the light, went to the bathroom at 6:55. Emily read a book at 8:10 p.m., left hand on chin, right hand flipping pages. Emily wrote something after finishing the movie at 9:12 p.m. Desk lamp turned off at 9:49. Rachel couldn't read further. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from a deep chill inside her, as if she had entered a place no one was meant to go. A place without light, without warmth. That night, as Emily slept, Rachel stood quietly outside her daughter's door. She didn't knock. She didn't enter. She stood in the darkness like a silent guard. For the first time, she was no longer certain what was right or wrong in this house. The next morning, she went to see Dr. Olivia Harper. They didn't meet in an office. Olivia had suggested a small cafe on the corner, the same one they used to visit back in college. Olivia had a sharp gaze and a voice that never rushed. She tilted her head as Rachel finished recounting what she had found on the computer. "Tom came to my clinic once," Olivia said slowly. "It was about 6 years ago, not for treatment, just to bring his elderly mother. But I remember him. Once he mentioned someone named Isadora. He said she left him too soon." Rachel fell silent. Olivia continued, "The problem isn't that someone remembers a person. It's how they replace that memory with a living being. People with obsessive tendencies often can't see boundaries. If Tom is seeing Emily as a replacement..." Rachel didn't need to hear more. Her mind filled with moments when Tom lingered too long watching her daughter draw. The questions he asked about her hair, her sleeping habits, the book she had only just started, all matching the notes Rachel had read. One late afternoon, she ran into Maggie Davis, Emily's teacher, in the school courtyard. "Emily isn't in the art club anymore," Maggie said, hesitating. "I asked why, and she just said, 'I don't like drawing at night anymore. When the lights go out, I get scared.'" Rachel only nodded. She didn't say anything, but deep down she knew this was not random. This wasn't coincidence. When they returned home, Emily went straight to her room as usual. Rachel stayed in the kitchen. On the table was a drawing that Olivia had returned. Emily had drawn it in broken black pencil strokes. No setting, no background, no sunlight. Just a sleeping woman, and from the ceiling a shadow leaning down, staring. At the bottom corner of the picture, a faint pencil line read, "He doesn't call me Emily." Rachel stared at the drawing for a long time. Her eyes could no longer see clearly, but her heart heard every word. She stepped outside and stood beneath the porch roof. The rain was soft, steady. She thought of all the times she had tried to rebuild her life, believing things would be fine, that a new person could fill the old gaps. But some wounds can't be replaced, and some lines once crossed are no longer concern, but control. That night, once Emily was asleep, Rachel retrieved a small voice recorder she had used for work. She placed it behind the bookshelf in the hallway right outside her daughter's room. She said nothing, just turned off the lights and returned to her room. But inside, she was no longer still. Her sleep broke halfway through the night. Not by sound, but by a feeling. A sense that someone or something had gone too far. The next morning, as she listened to the recording, she stopped at the 6-minute mark. Soft footsteps, a faint click of a door opening, then a whisper barely audible. "Isadora, you're quiet again tonight." Rachel closed her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just placed the recorder in her drawer and quietly locked it. Something inside her had broken, but it wasn't panic. It was a decision. Rachel Carter wasn't someone who lost her composure easily, but that night she spent a long time just sitting in silence, staring at the small black recording device in her hand. No blinking light, no warning message, just a tiny plastic box that somehow shattered everything she once believed to be safe. The audio still echoed in her ears, looping exactly 3 times. A man's voice, not loud, not soft, like someone whispering to himself in the dark. The words were fragmented, as if caught between 2 worlds. "Isadora, are you feeling sad again today? Are you still upset with me?" She couldn't tell what chilled her more, the way Tom spoke those words, or the fact that he had no idea his voice had been recorded. Rachel didn't turn on the lights. She didn't start the stove. She sat in the dark, shoulders slightly slumped, as if someone had just pulled out part of her spine. She had suspected, had waited, had watched, but hearing it was still different than seeing it, and now what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that Emily had been ahead of her. Far ahead. When had her daughter learned to live in silence? When had she stopped coming to her mother with the things that kept her awake at night? Rachel remembered the way Emily had looked at Tom during dinner last week. It hadn't been fear exactly, more like she was looking through him at some empty space only she could see. Rachel stood still, holding the recording device. Without switching on the hallway light, she walked carefully, as though even the softest sound might disturb something fragile that hadn't been broken yet. Emily's bedroom door was ajar, like always, but this time when Rachel gently pushed it open, she paused to take a deep breath. Emily was lying on her side, hugging her pillow legs, curled gently like a cocoon. The soft, globe-shaped nightlight cast a pale, amber glow across her back, projecting her shadow onto the wall. Rachel didn't walk in immediately. She stood there watching for a long moment, as if seeing her daughter asleep for the very first time. "My love," she whispered as she sat beside the bed. Not to wake her, not to soothe her, but to remind herself that it wasn't too late to speak the truth. "I've missed so many things, but I'm still here." There was no response. Emily kept sleeping, but her breathing had grown deeper, steadier. Rachel didn't know if she was imagining it, but something in the room felt different, like the air had become a little warmer. There was no scent of coffee in the kitchen that morning. Rachel didn't start the machine. She poured a glass of milk, set it beside a wooden bowl of sliced fruit. The sun hadn't fully reached the kitchen yet, but there was just enough light to make the shapes of the two glasses on the table clear. She sat down, folded her arms, and waited. Emily walked in as usual, sweater draped over her shoulders, hair unbrushed, eyes still slightly swollen. She looked at her mother, then sat down without saying a word. Her small fingers reached for the glass, tapping lightly against it in a random rhythm. Rachel watched her for a moment, then spoke. "I heard someone walking in the hallway last night. Did you hear anything?" Emily didn't lift her eyes. She tapped the glass once more, then gently shook her head. "No, I must have been asleep." Rachel nodded. A slow nod, not to confirm anything, just to release something unspoken inside her. "I used to think you were quiet because you were shy, but now, I wonder if maybe you've gotten used to keeping things in instead of letting them out." Emily looked at her. That gaze made Rachel pause. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't rejection. It was like she was waiting for something more honest. "And I know," Rachel continued, "silence is a way of living too. But if someday you feel like just having someone to listen is enough, I'll be there. No need to explain. No need for anyone to raise their voice." Emily set the glass down. She didn't drink. She just said softly, "You know, Mom, some things that happen in silence are louder than any explosion." Rachel didn't know how to respond. She didn't need to. That sentence wasn't asking for an answer. It just needed to be said and heard. "I want to walk to school today," Emily said as she stood grabbing her coat. "Not because I need time, but because I want to see the trees again. Their leaves have changed." Rachel nodded. "Then I'll walk behind you. Not close enough to keep up, but not far enough to lose sight." The morning passed without either of them asking about dinner. After Emily left, Rachel opened the recording again, not to confirm anything, but so she wouldn't forget. Every detail was a piece of a life she needed to re-examine, not to torment herself, but to begin to repair it. That whisper still sent a chill down her spine. But this time, she no longer felt alone. Maybe because Emily had looked her in the eye, had spoken something Rachel never believed a 13-year-old girl would dare to say. And that was the beginning of the truth. Not a hidden darkness, but a quiet light, steady and unshakable. Rachel stood up and poured herself a glass of water. On the window, droplets of dew still clung to the glass. She didn't wipe them away. Some things are meant to remain as proof that there was once a time she couldn't see clearly. But eventually, she learned to turn around. Rachel carefully pulled back the tablecloth next to Emily's bed, her fingers brushing against the fine layer of dust clinging to the surface of the wall clock. That layer of dust seemed to be the only thing in the room that had remained untouched, and somehow it whispered to her that something had been disturbed. She removed the clock with bare hands, turned it over, not entirely sure what she was looking for. But after just 2 slight rotations, a small latch popped open, as if it had been waiting to be discovered all along. Inside was a tiny lens no bigger than a fingertip, peering out directly toward Emily's bed. Without looking away, Rachel stepped back and sat down on the wooden chair beside the bed, still holding the clock tightly in her hands, as if it contained a truth she wasn't yet ready to confront. Her breathing halted in slow intervals, not out of fear, but from a bitter heaviness rising in her chest. She didn't panic. She wasn't angry. She was simply a mother tracing her way through the darkness of her own home, searching for the boundary she once believed was sacred and untouchable. She checked the outlets near the headboard next. Inside a narrow gap between the wall and socket plate, a thin plastic piece was wedged in place. Not obvious, but not expertly hidden either. When she pulled it free, a small indicator light blinked one last time before fading. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from grief. How many nights had her daughter lain here under someone's silent observation without knowing? No scream rose in her throat, just a quiet stillness, like a door being slammed shut on something she had once trusted completely. Rachel opened her bag, laid both devices on the table, then powered up her personal laptop. The once familiar keystrokes felt unbearably heavy now, as if she were unlocking a new kind of door right in her own kitchen. The screen flickered for a few seconds before an image appeared: Emily's bedroom in the middle of the night, dim lamplight, glowing faintly across the bed. A tall man stepped inside without knocking, without saying a word. He moved closer, leaned in near the child's face as if whispering something. Though the microphone didn't capture the audio clearly, the motion of his lips was enough to steal Rachel's breath. Something did not belong there yet. It had been lurking for nights. The footage jumped to 2 nights earlier. Same tall figure, same silent room, Emily lying on her side, her breathing steady like she was dreaming of something peaceful. The amber glow of the night lamp cast a quiet sheen on half her face. The man stood still, not moving, as if time had paused, just so he could watch. His gaze pierced through even her dreams. He didn't touch her, but it was the stillness itself that made everything feel wrong. Silence was no longer safety. It had become a form of invasion that needed no sound. Rachel sat upright. No tears fell. There was no space left for emotion. Her heart was full of things to do, like each silence had lined up a series of urgent actions waiting their turn. She packed the devices into a zippered pouch, time-stamped each clip, and tucked a short handwritten note into a small notebook. To be verified at the forensic lab. She said nothing to Emily that morning. The girl ate a simple breakfast of toast and almond butter, eyes fixed on her plate but mind far away. Rachel stood at the sink longer than usual, letting the sound of running water calm the noise in her head. That evening, Tom brought a cup of hot tea into her room. The same black tea she'd liked since last year, laced with ginger and a hint of lemon. He set it on the table as if nothing had happened and asked with unsettling politeness, "Have you been sleeping well these past few nights?" She nodded, then turned away. The tea was still steaming, but she didn't touch it. When he left, his footsteps were even, the door closed gently behind him like every other time. But inside her, the image of him standing beside Emily's bed was clearer than ever. Some people smile so often they begin to feel like strangers. That kind of distance isn't physical. It's a collapse in trust, once full, now irreparably broken. Emily entered the kitchen while Rachel was wiping down the table. She hesitated behind the cabinet before speaking up. "If someone told me I look like someone I've never met, should I try to be like that person?" Rachel set the cloth down and turned to face her. She didn't ask for more. She didn't press. The girl's eyes were too fragile for any explanation. "You don't need to be anyone else," Rachel said slowly and clearly. "You just need to be you, and that is enough." Emily didn't reply. But after dinner, she took out her sketch pad and sat for hours in the living room. The silence in the house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to be expressed. This time, her drawing had no complicated lines. A plain room with 4 walls, no windows, no furniture. In the center was a wooden chair where a small girl sat with her head down, arms wrapped around herself. Overhead hung a single round light shining directly onto her. Everything else was darkness except for that one cold circle of light. In the bottom corner, she had drawn a wall clock. The hands pointed to exactly 1 a.m. Rachel looked at the drawing without asking. Those walls were the very ones around her daughter's room. That light was the device that had quietly watched her. And the girl in the center, that was Emily, exposed by an unwanted gaze that saw too much. Rachel gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder, letting the warmth of her hand reach the small heart, still learning how to steady itself. No questions. No explanations. Sometimes the strongest form of protection is simply being there, staying when someone needs a place to lean. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They only need to be seen, named, and believed. Tomorrow, Rachel would go to the police station, but tonight she sat beside her daughter, making sure that the light in their home was no longer a tool for surveillance, but a quiet warmth that said one thing clearly: no one enters her room at night anymore, except the love of a mother who will never again stay silent. Not every conversation begins with a question. Some begin with a long silence when both people know exactly what needs to be said, yet neither is ready to hear it with an open heart. Rachel didn't look at the clock. She didn't tidy up the room as she usually did either. Everything remained as it was, intentionally, as if the old air was needed for the confrontation ahead. On the table were only 3 items: a drawing Emily had made, a hard drive containing footage from her daughter's bedroom, and a printed transcript of the audio recording, 3 pieces of evidence that didn't need words. Thomas's footsteps echoed from the upstairs hallway. Slow, even unrushed, he entered with his familiar politeness, nodding slightly the same way he used to invite her for afternoon tea on the porch. "You called me?" he asked, as if this were just another everyday conversation. Rachel didn't respond right away. She simply motioned toward the chair across from her. Thomas sat down, his eyes glancing briefly at the drawing. He didn't ask. He didn't avoid. But he didn't seem shaken either. "Emily drew this 3 weeks ago." Rachel began, her voice steady, like someone reading aloud to themselves. "After you entered her room without knocking." Thomas tilted his head, examining it. "I guess she felt lonely. Or like she was being watched," she said, her eyes fixed on him. He didn't answer, just stayed silent, looking at the picture, at the little girl in the drawing, turning her back to the light. Rachel placed the hard drive on the table. "This holds footage from 1 a.m. You stood next to her bed. You didn't do anything. You just stood there. And you said things no father should ever say to someone else's daughter." Thomas nodded slowly. No denial. No protest. He sat up straighter, as if pushed into an invisible interrogation. "I listened," Rachel continued. "I heard you call her Isadora." The name fell into the room like a soft sound with the weight of a boulder. "I didn't do anything wrong." Thomas spoke, his voice hoarse. "I just wanted to keep her safe. Isadora. She left me. I couldn't lose her again." Rachel placed both hands on the table, not out of anger, but to steady herself. "Who is Isadora?" "Someone I once loved," Thomas replied. "When I was young. She died in an accident on her way home. She was only 16. I never got over it." 16, Rachel repeated. "Emily is only 13. Do you realize what's wrong here?" Thomas lowered his head, his hands gripping his knees tightly. Silence. Rachel pulled out a small cardboard box beside her chair. She opened the lid and took out an old photo. "I found this in your mailbox," she said, placing it on the table. "Isadora, summer of 1997. She looked so much like Emily that I felt a chill when I saw it." Thomas glanced at the photo, then turned away. "None of us get to choose our past," Rachel said, her voice softer, "but we can choose to stop, to not let the past corrode the present." "I never meant to hurt her," Thomas said, for the first time sounding truly desperate. "I just wanted to see her. To see Isadora alive again, even if only in part." Rachel shook her head. "You violated her. Not through action, but through silence, through the way you turned her bedroom into a place of your memories. You didn't see Emily, you saw a ghost, and you clung to that ghost like a drowning man clings to driftwood." Thomas clenched his fists. He looked up. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. "I didn't want to harm anyone, but I don't know how to let go." Rachel walked slowly to the window, gently pulling back the curtain. The daylight streamed through the dusty glass, casting a long streak across the floor. "You don't need to know how to let go. You just need to step out of a place you no longer belong." She turned back, looking at him carefully for the first time. No fear, no rage, just a disappointment so deep it couldn't be named. "Emily is my daughter. She is alive. She breathes. She draws. But she can't sleep peacefully anymore. Because a man who doesn't call her by her name, who doesn't respect a child's boundaries, stood where he should never have stood." Thomas rose. No reaction. No defense. "The police will be here this afternoon," Rachel said. "I've turned in everything. The hard drive, The transcripts, the camera footage, even the coded diary entries that only she and her teacher could understand. Thomas walked to the door, paused, turned his head. "Can I see Emily just once?" Rachel didn't respond immediately. She touched the back of the empty chair. "You saw her every night, without permission. Now it's best that she be left in peace." He nodded, opened the door and stepped out without another word. When the door closed behind him, Rachel exhaled not out of relief, but because she knew from now on she would never allow herself to look away again. From the staircase, Emily came down. She carried a warm cup of cocoa, placed it on the table, said nothing. She looked at her mother, then at the chair Thomas had once occupied. In a soft voice, she asked, "Mom, are you not angry anymore?" Rachel shook her head. "I'm not angry. I'm learning to do what's right for both you and me." Emily smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but it was more real than any expression she had shown in months. In the corner of the desk, the ceramic coffee cup had long gone cold. Rachel Carter placed her hand on the old wooden surface, her finger gently brushing the edge of the case file. No one was rushing her. No eyes were watching closely, but inside her a voice rang as clearly as a bell, echoing across an empty square. "Don't let that girl wait one more day." The Maplewood police station stood behind the town park, its exterior shaded with moss wooden windows, fogged but not cold. Inside, the soft glow of a ceiling bulb dimmed just enough to match the calm demeanor of Detective Samuel Brooks, a middle-aged officer seated across from Rachel. He didn't speak immediately. He looked straight at her, as if he were weighing not just the evidence on the table, but the courage in the woman before him. Rachel set a small box in front of him and opened the lid. Inside were 2 recording devices, a memory card printed stills from video files, 3 audio recordings, and finally Emily's old leather journal, its pages filled with codes, sketches, and symbols. "I'm not sure what to call all this," she said slowly. "I just know it's the part I've kept quiet for far too long." Samuel put on gloves and carefully examined each device. He played one of the recordings, and a whisper emerged from the connected laptop speaker. Very soft, just loud enough to make out the words. "Isadora, aren't you painting today? Don't hide. I know you still remember." Rachel sat upright, her hands interlocked but steady. Samuel paused the playback and looked at her through his glasses. "We'll need further verification on the psychological impact. The audio and visual evidence is serious, but since the victim hasn't given a statement, we'll require a professional's evaluation on long-term harm." "I've already arranged for that. Emily will be meeting someone who understands her." Samuel nodded slightly. His eyes held no skepticism, only the caution of someone who had seen too many cases where adults arrived too late. "I'll forward the case to the analysis unit and issue a formal request for Thomas Everett to appear for questioning. For now, he remains free, but will be under surveillance." Outside the station, sunlight angled through the trees. The golden leaves shimmered like threads of light against a clear sky. Rachel descended the front steps and pulled out her phone. The voice on the other end answered after 2 rings. "Olivia, I need her. The therapist you mentioned. Emily is ready." The Oak Ridge Child Wellness Center sat on the 3rd floor of a pale pink building near the square. Inside mint green walls, a small bookcase, a wooden desk, and a cushioned armchair replaced anything that resembled a hospital. There were no harsh stares, no interrogations. Emily sat across from a woman with cinnamon-colored curls, Dr. Hannah Whitmore, the very person Olivia had once emphasized. She doesn't just listen. She waits until the child is truly ready. The first session had no questions. Only watercolors, crayons, and a blank sheet of paper. Emily didn't say a word. She picked up a gray crayon, then a deep brown. She drew a large house with many shuttered windows. Only one was slightly ajar, where the shape of a woman leaned down, her hand resting on the shoulder of a girl, curled up with her face turned away. There were no clear lines, no sunlight, just a trace of dim light. Hannah said nothing. She simply placed a second blank sheet on the table, neither prompting nor rushing. Afterward, Rachel sat with Olivia on the porch at home. She asked quietly, "Can a single drawing really be enough to prove a child has been hurt?" Olivia paused before answering. "There's no such thing as enough to prove pain, but sometimes one drawing is enough to begin believing. and belief, Rachel, is sometimes the very first step toward justice. That line settled quietly in Rachel's thoughts as she sat in the living room that evening, the lights low, her tea still warm. She opened Emily's journal, flipping through the early pages, simple sketches, scattered symbols she once dismissed as childish scribbles. But now, each mark carried weight. A house with shuttered windows, a girl standing outside with wide, sad eyes, a long shadow behind her. Late at night, Detective Samuel Brooks returned to his office. A report from the civil registry had just arrived by email. Thomas Everett's record showed signs of alteration. In 2012, he had used another name, Daniel Moore. And under that name, he had once been accused of stalking a student at a liberal arts academy in Durango. The case was dismissed due to lack of concrete evidence, and the main witness withdrew the complaint. Still, a restraining order had been issued for 2 years. Samuel printed the file and placed it beside Rachel's statement. On the final page, he circled a note in red ink. Contact Durango Civil Court to verify the status of former witness. Outside the window, the town had lit up. The distant cry of a tamale vendor blended with the soft scraping of a broom against pavement. Samuel leaned back in his chair, opening a drawer to retrieve a silver lighter. He didn't smoke, but sometimes flicking the flame reminded him that some things couldn't be forgotten simply by choosing not to mention them. In the quiet night of this small town, the clues had started to speak for themselves. And truth, even when locked inside pages whispered in the dark or drawn in charcoal, would eventually find its way through the hands of those who still believed in the light. And a mother, after so much hesitation, had chosen to rise from her silence and pull her daughter out of the shadows she once lacked the courage to face. Sometimes you don't need to shout to prove love. You just need to act. Since Thomas was taken into custody for investigation, the house had fallen into an odd quiet. It wasn't the heavy, unsettling silence of previous nights, but rather a fragile stillness like a sheer curtain drawn after a storm. Every object in the house seemed to regain its own breath, no longer tainted by caution. The space remained the same, but the atmosphere had shifted. No one came into the kitchen unexpectedly at night anymore. The hallway no longer echoed with footsteps at the same rigid hour. Rachel still woke early, but she no longer set an alarm. She let the natural light wake her through the thin curtain, the soft scratching of Emily's pencil in the room next door, the quiet sound of a chair sliding across the wooden floor. Those were the things that gently pulled her out of sleep. Mornings no longer meant rushing for coffee and hurrying off to work. Instead, she moved more slowly, brewed a pot of peppermint tea, and joined her daughter on the porch. No words were needed. Sometimes the quiet presence of someone you trust is enough to soothe the wounds that have no name. Emily still locked her bedroom door at night. It wasn't a sign of fear, but more of a habit that helped her feel safe. The nightmares were gone. She no longer woke up crying, but whenever the lights flickered because of faulty wiring, she would freeze for a second, her back slightly stiff. Rachel always noticed, but never asked. Instead, she would quietly squeeze her daughter's hand beneath the table, a silent reassurance that didn't need to be spoken aloud. One afternoon, Emily handed her a folded piece of paper. The writing was tiny, like thread stitched on cloth. "I don't see him in my dreams anymore. But whenever the lights blink, my chest tightens." Rachel read it slowly. Her hand trembled just a bit, but she didn't show it. She laid the paper gently on the time-worn wooden table as if holding a small piece of her daughter's heart. She called Dr. Olivia Harper the next day. What her friend said lingered in her mind long after the call ended. It shows Emily is starting to regulate her emotional response. But healing doesn't happen in a moment. It's like planting lavender. You have to water it every day, and you can't expect it to bloom unless you truly live beside it. At the third therapy session, Emily chose to sit near the window where sunlight fell directly on the blank page in front of her. She didn't speak much. Dr. Harper didn't ask. They simply sat together, listening to the ceiling fan spin and the gentle swish of colored pencils on paper. When the session ended, Emily handed Dr. Harper a drawing. It showed a softly lit room with 2 wicker chairs facing each other and a small table in between with a teapot still steaming. The window was slightly open, no curtains drawn. At the bottom corner, Emily had written in delicate italic print, "This place doesn't need a camera because Mom is always here." There was nothing left to explain. Dr. Harper folded the drawing, slipped it into a separate envelope, and stored it in Emily's file as a turning point in her recovery. week later, on a humid afternoon, Rachel heard a short chime at the front gate. A woman in her early 30s stood there neatly dressed, her hair tied up. She introduced herself as Grace Mitchell, a freelance journalist who had written several articles about children's rights in the northern counties. She said she had learned about Rachel's case through a medical contact and asked permission for a brief interview about the experience. Rachel invited her to the backyard. They sat on the stone bench beneath the bougainvillea vines. There was no recorder, no notebook. Grace placed a single pen and a blank sheet of paper on her lap and waited quietly. "I don't intend to write a sad story," Grace began. "I just want to understand what makes a mother not turn away from the truth, even when it could cost her everything." Rachel stayed silent for a long time. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the scent of damp soil. She didn't answer right away, but eventually she spoke slowly, one word at a time. "Because if I turned away, my daughter would think she deserved to be left behind." Grace gave a small nod. Nothing more was said. 2 days later, a short column appeared in the local newspaper, author unnamed, under the simple headline, "When a child stops speaking, adults must learn to listen in every other way." That afternoon, Rachel received a phone call from Detective Samuel Brooks. His voice was low and firm. "Ms. Rachel, the district attorney has officially indicted Thomas Everett on 2 charges: violation of a minor's privacy and infliction of serious psychological harm. The case will move to a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks. If you need legal support, we can recommend an attorney to protect both your and Emily's rights." Rachel sat still after the call ended. She returned to the desk in her living room. Her manuscript, a first book on rebuilding trust after trauma, was still open. The last line she had written the day before read, "Some children never scream. Not because they don't feel pain, but because they were once taught to stay silent." A small drop of water fell onto the page. She didn't wipe it away. Sometimes tears don't need to be hidden. They are the clearest proof that we have heard, believed, and chosen not to turn away. That night, Emily came home from therapy. She hung her backpack, neatly changed clothes, and went to the kitchen. Rachel said nothing about the phone call. She simply poured a cup of hot cocoa, set it beside her daughter, and sat in the chair across from her. Emily didn't ask. She opened her sketchbook and picked up her colored pencils. Under the soft yellow light, she began to draw. And for the first time in a long while, her page filled with bright orange and golden hues, like sunshine returning after a long stretch of gray. Outside the window, the breeze carried the scent of cinnamon trees from the garden into the house. That night, no dream woke her in the middle of her sleep. No one opened her door at midnight. And the most important thing was, she knew that if she ever did dream of something again, her mother would still be there beside the cold cup of tea, listening all the way through. Beneath a thin layer of frost on the window pane, the small bookshop sat quietly at the corner of Maplewood Springs. Warmth drifted from the tea counter in the back, where Rachel Carter set a dark clay kettle steaming with the soft scent of cinnamon and orange peel. Winter hadn't arrived with howling winds, but instead slipped in through the details newspaper taped over drafty frames, baskets of yarn tucked beside cushioned chairs, and the eyes of visitors that always carried something unsaid. On the wall opposite the counter, a collection of watercolor paintings hung in wooden frames. None bore a name, only a small handwritten line beneath each, "Anonymous artist who chose to stay with the light." Every morning, Rachel wiped the glass with her bare hands, each movement slow and deliberate, as if soothing a memory not yet fully asleep. The shop had once been the reading room of the local elementary school. Rachel had leased it from the town board under the condition that the children's library section remain untouched. Each week, she hosted a small reading hour for local students, a time when Emily Carter used to sit quietly without ever saying a word. Now it was Emily who stood up to read the first pages of children's books aloud, her voice soft and steady like the scent of cedarwood. Sometimes younger kids would ask, "Why are your drawings so sad?" And Emily would simply smile and reply, "Because each one is still looking for its light." Emily had returned to school like an old flower blooming again after a strange wind. She didn't speak much, nor did she laugh easily, but her gaze no longer looked clouded. Healing doesn't always come quickly, just as the sun can rise without waking everything at once. The principal, who once remained silent during parent-teacher conferences, now checked in regularly on Emily's emotional and academic well-being, her voice gentler than it had been. The art teacher kept one of Emily's older drawings pinned in the corner of the staff room as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most fragile things are the most courageous. When the schoolyard emptied and the noise faded, Emily stayed behind, packing her books under the old maple tree. Yellow leaves fell around her feet in silence. Sarah Thompson, her old deskmate, approached slowly, backpack in hand, and a calm look on her face. No apologies, no explanations. She simply sat beside Emily, placed her backpack down, and said gently, "I've kept this spot open for you every day since you left." Emily froze, her eyes lingering on the blank space next to her name, as if deciding whether to stay silent or share. After a few quiet moments, she lowered her pen and drew a small dot. Not to end anything, but to begin again. Because some dreams don't need words, only the presence of someone who believes they'll arrive in time. During literature class, the teacher read a poem by Gabriela Mistral. No one spoke. No chairs creaked. Emily scribbled a line in the margin of her notebook, not aloud, but when the teacher passed by, she smiled softly at the words. "We don't need to shout. We just need to be heard." Lately, Rachel stayed at the shop later than usual, not because of work, but because of the quiet calm that came late. The wind brushing past the doors no longer gave her chills. Instead, it felt like being wrapped in something gentle and unnamed. One evening, while rearranging books behind the counter, she opened a newly delivered box from the printer. Inside was a slim package and a pale brown envelope with no sender's name, just 3 slanted words written in ink for Mom. The handwriting made Rachel's hands tremble. She opened it carefully, reading slowly as if afraid to disturb a fragile breeze. "I'm not looking for forgiveness. But I hope you understand that when I chose silence, it was because I didn't know what to trust anymore in the mess adults had made. Thank you for quietly stepping toward me when I had no more words to call out." Rachel didn't cry. She placed the letter on the sofa cushion as if laying to rest a chapter that had quietly closed. Through the glass window, tiny snowflakes drifted sideways, not thick, not hurried. The cold outside seemed like nothing more than a backdrop for something tender inside. She realized then that sometimes silence is the deepest kind of comfort we can give each other. A customer entered the shop as the door chime rang softly. Wrapped in an old gray coat and a plum-colored knit scarf, they paused in front of a painting with slightly trembling brushstrokes, eyes caught in a feeling that had no name. When Rachel poured more tea into the ceramic cup, the visitor spoke in a quiet voice. "This place makes me think of a soul that once shattered, but then slowly picked up every piece." She didn't reply, only smiled and glanced toward the glass where a handwritten line in blue ink read, "This place believes that every person deserves to be heard even before they can speak." In a small house at the edge of town, Rachel still wiped down every book with a soft cloth, simmered cinnamon water on the stove, and folded the day into a few diary lines. Not poetic, just one small moment. Emily paused when she saw a little sparrow land on the windowsill, its head tilted as if listening to something only it could hear. No one said a word, but everything quietly kept moving. Outside, Maplewood Springs moved gently into another season, and the little bookshop named Bright Light remained open every day, as if to say this, not everyone needs to be fully understood. Sometimes having someone who's willing to listen without judgment is enough to keep a soul from slipping away from the light. The story of Rachel and Emily is not just the journey of a mother brave enough to face a painful truth, but also proof that those who do harm will eventually be exposed by the light of justice, while those who choose to stand on the side of truth will be rewarded with the most beautiful things in life. Perhaps the most painful part of life is not the hurt itself, but the silence we keep when no one is willing to listen. But like Emily, sometimes all it takes is for one person to step forward, one person to believe, and every shadow begins to fade. What do you think about the mother's actions in this story? If you were, Rachel, would you have the courage to stand with your daughter even when the truth hurts? And do you believe, as I do, that sometimes all it takes is one look of understanding, one embrace at the right moment to save a soul on the verge of breaking? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever witnessed or gone through something that made you stay silent out of fear, please know this: here you have a safe place to share. I wish you strength. And if today feels heavy for you, please remember you are not alone. Thank you for being here with me. We'll meet again in another story where kindness still has a place to exist.